Hello and welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So today I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. I wanted to talk a little bit about network attached storage. And in my particular case, if you've been watching the videos on my channel, you've noticed that I use a QNAP NAS. As a matter of fact, I have a couple of QNAP NAS devices. So why do I use a QNAP NAS as opposed to using something else? Well, most people own a USB disk and they connect it to a desktop or laptop to make copies and backups. Certainly many years ago, I would say 10 years ago, I had a whole drawer full of USB attached disk drives that I would connect to my machines. I would perform backups, and that is pretty much how I'd get my backups or copies of whatever it is I needed. So network attached storage, or NAS devices, are used to share a backup space on a network via either server message block, common internet file service, which are both the names for Microsoft file sharing, Apple file service, AFS, or network file service, which is the Linux capability. And all of those are file-based backup systems. So in general, many NAS units sold have very small CPUs, and in fact, a lot of them are ARM-based to facilitate file sharing, and they're pretty inexpensive. You can get a very small NAS for maybe $100, $150, even sometimes with the disk. So brands like Western Digital, Asus Store, Buffalo, Netgear, Synology, and QNAP sell the majority of the NAS devices out there. So NAS devices are capable of many more functions. So what exactly can a NAS provide? Well, most NAS systems are simply small Linux-based computers, and they provide a turnkey solution to easily deploy a prepackaged set of services. But Linux can provide all of the services that a NAS can provide, but each service has to be separately configured and managed. So a retail NAS like a QNAP provides an easy-to-use front end to bundle many commonly used services. Examples of the types of services that you might see deployed are file sharing, virtual machines, Docker containers, LXC and LXD containers if you've been watching my channel, storage management, which includes RAID and snapshots, iSCSI, and fiber channel targets, and then network and virtual switch management, web servers, database, user accounts, perhaps even Microsoft domain emulation, network video recorders, otherwise known as NVR, and then media sharing and backup to restore, just to mention a few. So, file sharing. On the QNAP NAS, if you go into the file sharing options, you have the option to create shared folders, to create users, and to create user groups. And here I have a whole series of shares that I have created. Once you create shares and you put files in them, they have an application called FileStation. When you get into FileStation lists all the files in the file structure that you could access by going to that particular share on the network. In my case, most of my shares I share out via Microsoft file sharing because it seems to be the simplest out-of-the-box file sharing, often referred to today as CIFS, which is Common Internet File System. Virtualization Station is an application that QNAP has that's basically a virtual machine manager, and what it really is it's QEMU, which is the primary Linux virtual machine manager packaged with the front end. Container Station is another application that QNAP has, and it's used to manage Docker and LXC containers. So I've mentioned Container Station many times, but if you've watched my channel, you'll note that I many times will create either Docker or LXC containers from the command line prompt because it's more functional than the GUI. So this is Container Station, and certainly we can create Docker and LXD containers from this GUI. You used to be able to create LXC containers, but now towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, QNAP has decided to obsolete the LXC containers in favor of LXD containers. If you haven't seen it, I have a video on using QNAP's new container migration tool to migrate LXC to LXD containers. So one of the key points in using a NAS to do this type of thing is that you have a NAS with enough processor power on it. After all, if you were going to use a desktop server to go and virtualize some things, you might pick a very powerful desktop server to have enough resources. So pick something or pick a NAS that has a larger CPU and larger memory. So in my case, my machine here is a QNAP TS 1277. It is based on an AMD Ryzen 7 Pro 1700. It has 8 cores and 16 threads, and it has 64 gigs of memory. And you can see in this particular case, Container Station is reporting that the overall usage of the machine is at 8% CPU and 33% memory, despite the fact that the majority of these containers are anywhere between 2 and 6 gigabytes of memory, and there are 34 containers running. And over provisioning works very well for Container Station, allows you to run a lot more. But in my early days, the first QNAP NAS I had was an ARM-based processor, and it didn't have enough CPU to be able to run these things. So advanced planning really should tell you what size processor do I need and how much do I really need to be able to run on it. Okay, so the other thing that we have is we have storage management. And they have an application on QNAP called Storage and Snapshots. Here is a top-level overview of storage and snapshots. And the things that are in green are the devices that I have installed. The first two labeled M1 and M2 are M.2 SATA SSDs that are on the motherboard. And then the four S1 through S4s are 2.5-inch slots that could be for spinning disks or they could be for SSDs. I don't currently have anything in those 4 slots. And then the last 8 slots are 3.5-inch spinning drives. And in my case, there are 8 10 terabyte drives. I'm running an RAID 6 and I have 1 hot spare, so I net 5 drives worth of storage. And overall, I end up with around 45 terabytes of usable space. So here's another picture of storage and snapshots, and you can see that storage pool 1 has 45 terabytes of usable disk space. I have a main storage system that I simply call main storage. I have a dedicated storage space that's about 5 terabytes. That's for my QVR recording, which is QNAP's video recording software. And then I have a iSCSI target here that we'll talk about in a little bit. So here's iSCSI and Fibre Channel support that they also have. And here's an iSCSI disk, which happens to be a thick LUN, and it's a block-based LUN that provides an iSCSI disk that's 1.2 terabytes that I can connect from any of my desktops. If you haven't used iSCSI, I plan a future video where we talk about performance and usability of iSCSI from the desktop on a local area network and give you an idea of what kind of great performance you can get off of it and what the advantages are to using a block-based system like an iSCSI as opposed to using a file-based system such as CIFS. And then next they have an application called Network and Virtual Switch. Well, Network and Virtual Switch shows everything in 3 columns. The first column are your containers. They can be Container Station or they can be from virtualization stations. So they can be LXD, they can be Docker, or they can be VMs. The second column is a virtual switch column, and that's a column where we can go out and define exactly what kinds of switches we want. We can create a virtual switch structure that then becomes a part of our network. And then finally, in the third column, most QNAP NASs have four network adapters on them. In this case, it's four 1 gigabit NICs. And I have the first two adapters are tied together or aggregated in an 802.3 AD aggregated set. So I have 2 gigabits of bandwidth. I mainly do that for redundancy, but I also do it for performance. Adapter number 3 is connected to a port on my switch that goes to my IoT VLAN. And port number 4 goes to a switch port that goes to my Cloud DMZ VLAN. And if you've been listening to my channel, you've discovered that my Cloud DMZ VLAN is where I offer my public services out on the internet, and it's isolated from the rest of my network. Another screen of network and virtual switch drills down and shows the various settings of the software-defined switch and also shows which containers and virtual machines are using those. So you can see from this list I offer quite a bit on my Cloud DMZ network. I have quite a bit on my Scott and Katz network, which is my main LAN, and I have quite a bit on my IoT network as well. And then I also even have some things that are running on the internal Docker network. And the reason that's the case is because I have no reason to expose a couple of these things. They expose only ports. So then we have an application called Virtual Browser. Well, it's actually a virtual browser function. The application is actually called Browser Station. And Browser Station is an application that we can get to off network if needed. And we can, once we authenticate off network, we can connect to this and we can have a local web browser up that makes it possible to browse to websites on the local LAN which are not offered outside of the network. That has some great functionality for remote support, especially remote support of some of my customers that I do private cloud consulting for. So then we have web server databases and what I call the etc. category, which can actually be pretty huge, but give you an idea. This is what we call the network control panel on a QNAP NAS. And there's quite a few things down the left side, but right now we have this web server option. Now I might point out I have this web server enabled, but only for some internal functionality. I don't really use the built-in web server, and the reason for that is because all of my web instances are served out through LXC and Docker containers, so I don't really have the necessity to serve them from here. And then we have the QNAP QTS control panel. And QTS is basically the operating system for QNAP NASs. And this just reports at the top that I'm on a TS 1277, and it shows me various system settings, privilege settings, network settings, and application settings. Each one of these kind of being their separate app unto themselves. The interface is all a web-based interface. Where they manipulate screens inside of a web window. So the next thing is Microsoft domain emulation. So a QNAP NAS has the ability to actually fully emulate a Microsoft domain. And you can actually set up a Microsoft domain and you can enable whether or not you want it to do Active Directory domain authentication or whether you want it to use LDAP authentication. I use neither, and I just have local user accounts set up on my machine. So then you can also enable yourself as a domain controller. So you can make yourself your own domain, an own domain controller. You could have a bunch of Windows systems on your local area network, and you can actually join them to this domain, and they will not know any different that they're not talking to a Windows domain controller. And then one of my main applications that I use is a software network video recorder that they call QVR. I suppose that stands for QNAP Video Recorder. And here I'm just showing you my camera settings screen with some of my cameras. And it's an application and web interface unto itself that allows you to manipulate camera settings, set up events for motion detection, and other actions to launch other routines. I do a lot of home automation, and this is really handy because it can go off and trigger other events in my home network based upon movement on cameras. And then we have the concept of media sharing, DLNA and Plex. DLNA is something you may not have heard of. It stands for Digital Lifestyle Network Alliance. And DLNA is really, it's kind of an indigenous sharing capability that many file servers have had for years to serve media like music and movies. And I used to use a DLNA server almost exclusively, and now I've evolved towards Plex like most people have these days. So here's the DLNA server settings. You can see that I don't have it enabled right now because I don't have any need to with the Plex. The Plex can actually do DLNA if required also. And here's just a page from my Plex server. This is looking at the public offerings that Plex has. Most of these things are actually shared back via Crackle, but it also takes my personal media and shares it out in the house and also to some family members. So then we have an application called Hybrid Backup and Sync, otherwise known as HBS3. So this is a really great application. It helps you build your 3-2-1 backup strategy. On Brian's channel, he's talked a lot about backup and reviewed some really great open source backup programs out there. But this backup has an option to do replication between NASs. It has an option to do replication between different file sources. It also has an option to do deduplication, and it has an option to do offsite backups. And it can back up to other services. Like in this particular case, you can see I'm backing some things up to Amazon and then also to a remote rsync server. And then I have a couple of NASs that I back up to. So your backup strategy is something you want to work on. And this program is built into all QNAP NASs, or I should say installable. And you can install this free of charge as part of the software that they provide. So then we have Q packages. Well, QNAP has also these pre-built packages, and they're called Q packages because they have an extension of QPKG, and you can download and install a lot of them directly from the QNAP App Center, which is kind of like their application store. And then also there's a third-party store that's called QNAP Club that you can enable, and there's several more applications. I'd say overall, we're probably looking at a couple of hundred QNAP applications that could be installed on a QNAP server. So if you decide you want to get one, go ahead and make sure to have enough CPU and enough memory. You can spend, well, kind of the sky's the limit, but it's not unusual to spend $2,000-$3,000 on the server itself if you get a good server. And then, of course, you got to buy the disk on top of that. But then again, what would you spend for a really powerful gaming PC? So it's the same philosophy. It's just where do you put the money and what are you trying to do? And then we have the QTS desktop. So the QTS desktop basically looks just like a web page with icons on it. You can click on them. It opens those appropriate windows. In the lower right-hand corner here, I clicked on their stats window, and it shows that my TS1277 right now is running 5% CPU and 33% RAM. And then it gives you an idea of what your overall utilization of your file systems are. So, in summary, a NAS can provide much more than just network-based bulk file sharing, and a lot of people tend to think that way. QNAP and Synology both deliver integrated, prepackaged private cloud solutions providing a broad range of functionality. And a NAS with sufficient CPU and memory resources can be a powerful application server with VMs, Docker, and LXC LXD containers. And block-based storage options like iSCSI can extend high-performance desktop storage with the functionality of local storage. And NAS solutions can back up LAN workstations and replicate themselves to public cloud if required. A commercial software network video recorder like QVR Pro can often outperform hardware network video recorders that you can buy. And a powerful NAS can offer a broad range of software as a service in a private cloud implementation that costs less than public cloud services. Anyway, thanks for listening today, and please subscribe and like, and we'll see you next time.